The afternoon sun slanted through the tall windows of Westwood Academy of Music, casting long shadows across the polished wooden floor. Elena Mercer gathered her sheet music, tucking loose strands of graying hair behind her ear as she finished another exhausting day of teaching. At 57, she had been the senior piano instructor at the academy for 15 years, and she ran her classes with unwavering discipline. Students respected Elena, feared her, even for her sharp ear and even sharper tongue. She had trained under renowned musicians in her youth, and had once dreamed of performing on the world's grandest stages. Life had other plans. A wrist injury in her 30s had cut short her performing career, steering her toward teaching instead. Over the years, she had channeled her frustrated ambitions into molding young talents, demanding nothing short of perfection from each student who sat at her piano. "Remember to practice the Beethoven Sonata, 30 minutes minimum each day," she called after her last student of the day, a nervous 12-year-old boy who nearly knocked over his chair in his hurry to leave. Elena sighed as the door clicked shut behind him. So many students, so little natural talent. Sometimes she wondered why she bothered. The academy building quieted as evening approached. Most teachers had already left, but Elena often stayed late, using the peaceful hours to prepare lessons or simply enjoy playing without interruption. Tonight, she needed to select pieces for the upcoming spring recital, a task that required careful consideration of each student's abilities and weaknesses. As Elena walked down the hallway toward the faculty lounge to make a cup of tea, she heard a soft sound coming from practice room 3, the faintest whisper of piano keys being pressed, so gentle they barely made a sound. She paused, frowning. All students should have left by now, and the other instructors knew to reserve rooms through the proper channels. She pushed open the door without knocking. The room was dim, lit only by the fading daylight. A woman stood by the grand piano, her hand pulling back quickly from the keys as if she'd been caught stealing. It took Elena a moment to recognize her, the night janitor, a middle-aged woman with dark hair pulled back in a simple bun, wearing the gray uniform of the cleaning staff. "What are you doing in here?" Elena asked, her voice sharp with authority. The woman's eyes widened. "I'm sorry," she said, her accent thick but her English clear. "I was just dusting. I didn't touch anything important." Elena noticed the cleaning cart by the door but saw no dusting cloth in the woman's hands. Her gaze traveled to the gleaming surface of the Steinway grand piano, a prized instrument that cost more than what most people earned in a year. "This isn't a toy," Elena said coldly. "These instruments are very expensive and very sensitive. They're for students and faculty only." The janitor nodded quickly. "Yes, of course. I understand." She moved toward her cart, reaching for a spray bottle and cloth. Something about the woman's wistful glance back at the piano made Elena's irritation flare. "Have you been doing this regularly? Touching the instruments?" The woman hesitated before answering, her shoulders tensing slightly. "Sometimes I just look at them. They're beautiful. Looking is one thing, touching is another." Elena stepped further into the room, placing her music folder on a nearby chair. "What's your name?" "Maria," the woman replied quietly. "Maria Suarez." Elena had seen her around the building for months, maybe years, but had never bothered to learn her name. The cleaning staff came and went, invisible workers who emptied trash bins and mopped floors after hours. They weren't part of the academy's musical world. "Well, Maria, I don't mean to be unkind, but these instruments require special care, years of training. That's why people pay good money to learn here." Elena gestured toward the cleaning cart. "You should stick to cleaning, that's what you're paid for." The words came out harsher than Elena had intended, but she didn't retract them. Boundaries needed to be clear. The academy had strict rules about who could use the facilities, and for good reason. Maria's face remained composed, but something flickered in her dark eyes, a hurt that she quickly masked with a polite smile. "Yes, you're right. I'm sorry for the trouble." She turned away, focusing intently on wiping down the doorknobs and light switches, her movements efficient and practiced. Elena watched her for a moment, a flicker of guilt rising in her chest before she dismissed it. She wasn't being cruel, just maintaining professional standards. "Just make sure it doesn't happen again," Elena added, softening her tone slightly. "Some of these pianos are worth more than $100,000. Maria nodded without looking up. "I understand. It won't happen again." Elena gathered her things and left the room, the encounter already fading from her mind as she returned to thoughts of the upcoming recital. She had 6 weeks to prepare 20 students, many of whom barely practiced enough to play simple scales correctly. The thought made her shoulders tense with frustration. In the faculty lounge, Elena made herself a cup of chamomile tea and spread her notes across the table. The building grew quieter as darkness fell outside. Occasionally, she heard the distant sounds of Maria's cleaning cart rolling down the hallway, the gentle thump of trash bags being collected, the hum of the vacuum cleaner in distant rooms. 2 hours passed as Elena worked through her roster of students, matching each with appropriate pieces that would challenge without overwhelming them. It was delicate work that required knowing each student's capabilities intimately. She prided herself on this skill, even when dealing with students who showed little promise. When she finally packed up her materials, it was past 8 o'clock. The hallways were dark except for the security lights. As Elena walked toward the exit, she passed the open door of the main recital hall and paused. Maria was there, carefully dusting the Academy's prized concert grand piano, a magnificent instrument used only for special performances. What caught Elena's attention wasn't the cleaning itself, but the way Maria moved around the piano. There was a reverence in her gestures, a careful attention that went beyond mere dutifulness. She treated the instrument not as an object to be cleaned, but as something precious, deserving of respect. For a brief moment, Elena considered apologizing for her harsh words earlier. But what would be the point? Better to maintain professional distance. The cleaning staff had their role, and the music faculty had theirs. That's how institutions functioned best. Maria looked up and noticed Elena watching. She straightened immediately, nodding a respectful greeting before returning to her work. The moment for connection passed. Elena continued to the exit, signing out in the security logbook before stepping into the cool night air. As she walked to her car, her earlier words echoed uncomfortably in her mind. "You should stick to cleaning, that's what you're paid for." She pushed the thought away. She had been right to establish boundaries. Still, as she drove home to her quiet apartment, Elena found herself thinking about the look in Maria's eyes when she'd been caught at the piano. Not guilt or embarrassment, but something like longing. The next morning arrived with a steady spring rain that continued throughout the day. Elena's teaching schedule was full, leaving little time for reflection. She was particularly hard on her advanced students, making one teenage girl repeat a passage from Chopin 12 times until the phrasing was exactly right. "You have to feel the music breathe," Elena insisted, demonstrating the delicate rise and fall of the melody. "It's not just notes on a page. It's a living thing." The girl nodded, her fingers trembling slightly as she began the passage again. This time, Elena heard what she was looking for, that subtle shaping of the phrase that transformed mere playing into music. She nodded in approval, and the relief on the girl's face was palpable. "Much better. Now take it from the beginning." As the week progressed, Elena barely noticed Maria cleaning around the academy. They passed each other occasionally in hallways, exchanging brief nods but no words. If Maria was avoiding the practice rooms, Elena didn't notice. She was too absorbed in preparations for the spring recital, which was now the focus of all her energy. On Friday afternoon, Elena stayed even later than usual. A promising student had canceled her lesson due to illness, giving Elena a rare free hour. She used the time to play through some of her favorite pieces, music she performed for no one but herself these days. As her fingers moved across the keys of the practice room piano, Elena felt the familiar mix of joy and sorrow that playing always brought her. Joy in the music itself, sorrow for the career she might have had. She finished Debussy's Clair de Lune with a gentle final chord that seemed to hang in the air even after the sound had faded. When she looked up, she was startled to see Maria standing in the doorway, a stack of fresh towels in her arms. How long had she been listening? Elena felt suddenly exposed, as if caught in a private moment. "Do you need to clean in here?" Elena asked, her voice sharper than she intended. Maria shook her head quickly. "No, I'm sorry. I was just delivering these to the bathroom. I didn't mean to disturb you." She hesitated, then added softly, "That was beautiful." The simple compliment, offered with such genuine appreciation, caught Elena off guard. "Thank you," she replied, her usual defenses momentarily lowered. For a second, it seemed like Maria wanted to say something more. Instead, she just smiled politely and continued down the hallway, her footsteps fading into silence. Elena remained at the piano, her hands resting on the keys. Something about the encounter left her unsettled. There had been knowledge in Maria's eyes as she listened to the music, not the casual appreciation of someone who merely enjoyed pleasant sounds, but the deeper understanding of someone who knew music from the inside. But that was impossible. Elena was letting her imagination run away with her. She closed the piano lid and gathered her belongings. It had been a long week and she was tired. That was all. As she left the building, Elena noticed dark clouds gathering on the horizon, promising more rain. Like the first drops of an approaching storm, a feeling of unease settled over her, a sense that something in her carefully ordered world was about to change. A week passed, and Elena found herself staying later than usual at the academy. The spring recital was approaching quickly, and several students were woefully unprepared. She had spent the afternoon listening to a particularly frustrating performance by a teenage boy, whose wealthy parents insisted he had remarkable talent. In reality, he barely practiced and showed little interest in improving. "That's enough for today, Thomas," Elena had finally said, rubbing her temples. "Please, for both our sakes, practice your scales before our next lesson." The boy had shrugged and sauntered out, leaving Elena with a headache and a sense of growing disillusionment. 30 years of teaching, and it seemed the truly passionate students were becoming rarer each year. Now, well past 7 in the evening, Elena sat alone in her small office, nursing a cup of tea gone cold and reviewing her lesson plans for the following day. The building had grown quiet. Most of the staff had left hours ago, and even the usual sounds of the cleaning crew seemed distant. Elena stretched, feeling the stiffness in her shoulders from sitting too long. She should go home, make herself a proper dinner, perhaps call her sister in Colorado whom she hadn't spoken to in weeks. Yet something kept her rooted to her chair, a restlessness she couldn't quite name. Then she heard it, the unmistakable sound of a piano being played somewhere in the building. Not the hesitant plunking of a beginner or even the competent practice of an intermediate student. This was something else entirely. The music floated down the hallway, faint but clear, Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, Opus 9, Number 2, one of the most beloved piano pieces ever written. It was also notoriously difficult to play with the right touch. Many students could hit all the correct notes, but few could capture its delicate, dreamlike quality. This performance, though, Elena found herself holding her breath. The pianist played with exceptional sensitivity, each note perfectly weighted, the melody flowing like water over stones in a stream, rising and falling with natural grace. The left-hand accompaniment provided a gentle pulse beneath the ornamented right-hand melody, creating that sense of suspended time that Chopin demanded. Curious and a little confused, who could be playing at this hour? Elena rose from her desk and followed the music. It grew louder as she approached the main recital hall, the door to which stood slightly ajar, a sliver of light spilling into the darkened corridor. Elena paused outside, not wanting to interrupt. The music swelled into the middle section, the performer adding subtle rubato that emphasized the emotional core of the piece without becoming indulgent. Whoever was playing understood Chopin's intentions perfectly, the balance between structure and freedom, between heart and mind. Gently, Elena pushed the door open wider and peered inside. The recital hall was dimly lit, with only the stage lights on above the grand piano. And there, seated at the keyboard with straight-backed poise, was Maria. The cleaning cart stood forgotten in the corner of the room. Maria's gray uniform jacket was draped over the piano bench beside her. Her eyes were closed as her hands moved across the keys with fluid confidence, her body swaying slightly with the music. Elena stood frozen in the doorway, unable to reconcile what she was seeing with what she had believed about the quiet janitor. This was no amateur dabbling at the keys. This was a trained pianist and a remarkably good one. As the piece approached its conclusion, Maria added a wistful quality to the final phrases, stretching the tempo ever so slightly before returning to the main theme one last time. The final notes hung in the air like a lingering sigh. In the silence that followed, Elena found herself stepping forward, her footsteps echoing in the large space. Maria's eyes snapped open and she jumped to her feet, nearly knocking over the piano bench. I'm so sorry, she said quickly, reaching for her uniform jacket. I know I shouldn't be here. That was Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. Elena interrupted, her voice oddly calm despite her racing thoughts. Maria nodded, her eyes downcast. Yes, I was just finishing my break and… Her voice trailed off. Where did you learn to play like that? Elena asked, moving closer to the stage. Maria seemed to debate with herself before answering. In my country before I came here. I studied at the conservatory in Bogota. Elena blinked in surprise. You're a trained classical pianist? I was, Maria corrected gently. That was a long time ago. The awkwardness of their previous encounter hung between them. Elena thought of her dismissive words. You should stick to cleaning, that's what you're paid for. Shame crept up her neck, warming her cheeks. Why didn't you say anything when I… Elena couldn't quite finish the sentence. Maria shrugged, a small, resigned gesture. What would be the point? You were right. I am the janitor here. The pianos are not for me to use. The matter-of-fact way she said it made Elena's shame deepen. Please, she said, gesturing to the piano. Don't stop on my account. Would you play something else? Surprise flickered across Maria's face, quickly replaced by caution. I should get back to work. My break is over, and I have 3 more rooms to clean before my shift ends. Consider it part of your job tonight to play for me, Elena said, attempting a smile. Professional development? Maria hesitated, then slowly sat back down at the piano. What would you like to hear? Whatever you'd like to play. Maria thought for a moment, then placed her hands on the keys. She began to play Bach's Prelude in C major from the Well-Tempered Clavier. Book 1. The piece started simply enough, with its famous broken chord pattern, but as it progressed, Maria added subtle dynamics that brought out hidden melodies within the flowing arpeggios. Elena found herself moving to sit in the front row of the recital hall, watching Maria's technique with growing astonishment. Her posture, her hand position, the way she used the weight of her arms rather than just her fingers, all spoke of rigorous classical training. When the Bach ended, Maria moved seamlessly into a piece Elena didn't immediately recognize, something modern with jazz-influenced harmonies and a Latin rhythm underneath. What is that? Elena asked when Maria finished. It's beautiful. Something I wrote a long time ago, Maria replied softly. It's called Memories of Home. Elena stared at her, speechless for a moment. You compose as well? Maria nodded, her fingers still resting lightly on the keys. I used to. I studied composition as well as performance. And now you clean floors at a music academy, Elena said, the irony of it striking her forcefully. Life takes unexpected turns, Maria said with no bitterness in her voice. I needed work when I came to this country. This job pays the bills and… She ran her hand gently over the polished surface of the piano. It keeps me close to music, even if I can't play often. How long has it been since you performed? Elena asked, publicly. Almost 10 years. Since my daughter was born. A shadow crossed Maria's face. After my husband died, there was no money for childcare. No time for practice. Music became a luxury I couldn't afford. The recital hall fell silent as Elena absorbed this information. She thought of her own path, the injury that had derailed her performing career, the bitterness she'd carried for years afterward. But at least she had been able to continue teaching, to stay connected to her art in a meaningful way. Do you miss it? Elena asked. Maria's smile was sad but genuine. Every day. But I am grateful for these moments when everyone has gone home and I can play for a little while. She glanced at her watch and stood up. I really should finish my work now. Wait, Elena said, rising from her seat. Would you? Would you like to use the practice room sometimes, when they're not booked by students? Maria looked at her with surprise. You would allow that? Elena nodded, feeling something shift inside her. The rooms sit empty most evenings. It seems a waste, especially when someone with your talent… She trailed off, suddenly self-conscious. That is very kind, Maria said carefully, but I don't think the director would approve. I'm the senior faculty member, Elena replied with newfound determination. I can authorize the use of the practice rooms for special educational purposes. For the first time, a genuine smile lit up Maria's face. I would like that very much. Thank you. They stood in awkward silence for a moment before Maria moved toward her cleaning cart. I should finish my rounds. Of course, Elena said. But tomorrow evening, room 4 will be available after 7. It has the Yamaha Grand that was just tuned last week. Maria nodded, her eyes bright with an emotion Elena couldn't quite name. Until tomorrow, then. After Maria left, Elena remained in the recital hall, staring at the piano keys still faintly gleaming in the low light. She thought of Maria's playing, the sensitivity, the deep understanding of the music, the technical skill that remained despite years of neglect. And she thought of her own quick judgment, her dismissive attitude. How many times had she done this before? How many people had she sized up and categorized in an instant, never bothering to look deeper? The thought was uncomfortable. As Elena finally gathered her things and prepared to leave for the night, she found herself wondering about Maria's story. What had brought her from a conservatory in Colombia to cleaning floors in an American music academy? There was clearly much more to learn about the quiet woman who played Chopin with such feeling. Walking to her car under a sky full of stars, Elena felt something she hadn't experienced in a long time, a spark of genuine curiosity about another person. It was a small feeling, but somehow significant, like the first green shoot breaking through soil after a long winter. She thought again of Maria's composition, Memories of Home, with its bittersweet melody and complex harmonies. There was a story there, one Elena suddenly found herself wanting to know. For the first time in years, Elena found herself looking forward to the next day at the academy, not for her teaching schedule or her familiar routines, but for what might happen after hours when the building grew quiet and a new kind of music filled the empty rooms. The next evening, Elena found herself checking the clock repeatedly during her last lesson of the day. The student, a bright 10-year-old girl who usually held Elena's full attention, noticed her distraction. "Ms. Mercer, did I play it wrong?" she asked, her small fingers pausing over the keys. Elena shook her head, embarrassed to be caught daydreaming. "No, Lily, you're doing fine. Let's try once more from the beginning, and remember to count those eighth notes evenly." As soon as the lesson ended, Elena hurried through her usual end-of-day routine. She straightened the music books, filed away her lesson notes, and checked that practice room 4 was indeed available. The room schedule showed it was clear for the evening, as she had anticipated. At precisely 7 o'clock, she heard a soft knock on her office door. Maria stood there, looking uncertain, still wearing her gray uniform but with her hair freshly brushed and pulled back neatly. "You really meant it?" Maria asked, her voice hopeful but hesitant. "About using the practice room?" "Of course," Elena replied, rising from her desk. "Come, I'll show you which one." They walked together down the hallway, their footsteps echoing in the quiet building. Most of the other faculty had left, though a violin lesson continued somewhere in the distance, scales rising and falling in methodical repetition. "I don't want to get you in trouble," Maria said as they approached practice room 4. Elena waved away her concern. "I've been here 15 years. No one questions what I do." She unlocked the door and stepped aside to let Maria enter first. Besides, the rooms sit empty most evenings. It's a waste. The practice room was modest but well-equipped with a Yamaha grand piano, a music stand, and a small bookshelf filled with scores and sheet music. The last rays of evening sunlight streamed through the high windows, casting a golden glow over the space. Maria approached the piano slowly, almost reverently, running her fingers lightly over the polished wood before sitting down on the bench. She adjusted its height with practiced ease, then placed her hands on the keys without pressing them, as if reacquainting herself with an old friend. "I'll leave you to it," Elena said, moving toward the door. She felt suddenly intrusive, as if she were witnessing something deeply personal. "You don't have to go," Maria said quickly, "unless you have somewhere to be." Elena hesitated, then shook her head. "No, I don't have plans, but I thought you might want privacy to practice." "I've had plenty of that," Maria said with a small smile. "Too much, maybe." She patted the space beside her on the bench. "Please sit. I'd like to play something for you properly as a thank you." Somewhat awkwardly, Elena crossed the room and sat beside Maria on the piano bench. They were close enough that she could smell the faint scent of lemon from Maria's soap. "What would you like to hear?" Maria asked. "Something you love," Elena replied. Maria thought for a moment, then began to play Debussy's Arabesque No. 1. Her touch was delicate but assured, bringing out the flowing, water-like quality of the piece. The cascading arpeggios seemed to ripple under her fingers, each note distinct yet part of a seamless whole. Elena watched Maria's hands, noting her excellent technique, the relaxed wrists, the efficient finger movement, the thoughtful pedaling. But more striking was the expression on Maria's face. The tension she usually carried in her shoulders had melted away, replaced by a serene focus that transformed her completely. When the piece ended, Elena found herself speechless for a moment. "That was beautiful," she finally said. "Your Debussy is exquisite." "He's one of my favorites," Maria admitted. "His music always reminds me of water, the river near my childhood home in Colombia." Elena shifted on the bench to face Maria more directly. "May I ask, what happened? Why did you stop performing?" Maria's hands remained on the keys, playing a soft, absent-minded chord progression as she spoke. "It's not a very unusual story. I was studying at the National Conservatory in Bogota. I was good, maybe not exceptional, but good enough to dream of a concert career." She paused, her fingers stilling on the keys. "Then I met my husband, Carlos. He was a violinist, even more talented than I was. We fell in love, married young. When he got the opportunity to come to the United States to join a chamber orchestra, it seemed like the chance of a lifetime for both of us." "And then?" Elena prompted gently when Maria fell silent. "Life happened," Maria said with a small shrug. "The orchestra position fell through after we'd already moved here. Carlos found work playing in restaurant bands, hotel lobbies, whatever would pay the bills. I was pregnant with our daughter, Anna. We were struggling but happy enough." She took a deep breath before continuing. "Then Carlos was diagnosed with cancer. It happened so fast, within a year he was gone. I had a 3-year-old daughter, no family here, limited English, and bills I couldn't pay. Music suddenly seemed like a luxury I couldn't afford." "I'm so sorry," Elena said, meaning it deeply. "That must have been incredibly difficult." Maria nodded, her eyes distant with memory. "For a while I cleaned houses during the day while neighbors watched Anna. Then I found this job at the academy. The hours were better. I could be with Anna after school, then come here in the evenings after she went to bed. My neighbor checks on her while I'm working. And your piano playing? It became something private, something I could only do in stolen moments. Sometimes I would visit the public library where they had an old upright piano in the corner. Sometimes I would just play silently, practicing finger movements on tabletops." Maria smiled sadly. "But being here surrounded by music all day but unable to play, that's been the hardest part." Elena felt a deep ache in her chest. She thought of how casually she had dismissed this woman, how easily she had reduced her to her job title. The shame of it burned anew. "Your daughter must be older now?" she asked. "Anna is 13, Maria said, her expression brightening. "She's a good student, very smart. She likes science and math, not music, though I tried to interest her. Maybe it's better that way." "Why do you say that?" Maria's hands returned to the keys, playing a gentle, melancholy melody that Elena didn't recognize. "Music is a difficult path. It asks so much of you and often gives little in return. I wanted more security for her." The honesty of the statement struck Elena. Hadn't she felt the same disappointment at times? The gap between what she had dreamed music would bring her and the reality of her life? "May I hear your composition again?" Elena asked. "The one you played yesterday, Memories of Home?" Maria looked surprised but pleased. "You want to hear my music?" "Very much." With a nod, Maria straightened her posture and began to play. The piece started with a simple, nostalgic melody in her right hand, supported by rich jazz-influenced harmonies in her left. As it developed, it incorporated elements of Colombian folk rhythms beneath classical structures, creating something both familiar and utterly unique. Elena closed her eyes, letting the music wash over her. There was something in Maria's composition that touched her deeply. Perhaps the honesty of it, the way it spoke of longing and resilience and beauty found in unexpected places. When the final notes faded away, Elena opened her eyes to find Maria watching her. "What do you think?" Maria asked, a hint of vulnerability in her voice. "I think you're a composer of significant talent," Elena replied honestly. "Have you written many pieces?" "A few dozen over the years, mostly piano solos, though I've sketched some chamber works too. Nothing serious, just for myself. Would you show me more of them sometime?" Maria's eyes widened slightly. "You really want to see them?" "I do," Elena said, surprised to discover how much she meant it. "Your voice is distinctive, authentic. I'd like to hear more." For a moment, Maria simply stared at her as if trying to determine whether Elena was being sincere. Then she nodded slowly. "I'll bring some scores tomorrow. Most are just rough drafts." "Bring them anyway," Elena insisted. She glanced at her watch and was startled to see how much time had passed. "It's getting late. I should let you get to your work and I should head home." They both stood, the moment of connection still hanging between them, fragile but real. "Thank you for this," Maria said quietly as they left the practice room. "It means more than I can say." Elena locked the door behind them and handed Maria the key. "Keep it," she said. "Use the room whenever you can. Just make sure it's not booked for a lesson." Maria stared at the key in her palm as if it were something precious. "I don't know how to thank you." "Play," Elena said simply. "That's thanks enough." As Elena drove home that night, her thoughts were filled with Maria's music and her story. She thought of the countless times she had walked past the cleaning staff without really seeing them, the assumptions she had made based on uniforms and job titles, and she thought of Maria practicing piano fingerings on tabletops, of the music that had continued to live inside her, despite everything life had thrown in her path. There was a lesson there, one that Elena was only beginning to understand. When she arrived home, instead of her usual routine of a quick dinner and television, Elena went to her bookshelf and pulled out an old photo album. Inside were pictures from her student days at Juilliard, concert programs from her brief performing career, newspaper clippings of reviews, both good and bad. She hadn't looked at these mementos in years, had packed away these memories along with her youthful dreams. Now, turning the pages slowly, she felt not the usual bitterness but something more complex, a recognition of both loss and privilege, disappointment and fortune. Her career had been cut short, yes, but she had still been able to make a life in music, to teach, to play when she wanted to. She had never had to choose between her art and survival. Before going to bed, Elena did something she hadn't done in a long time. She sat at the small upright piano in her living room, removed the stack of mail and magazines that had accumulated on its closed lid, and began to play. Slowly at first, then with growing confidence. The music felt different somehow, more vital, more meaningful. As her fingers found their way through a Beethoven sonata she had once known by heart, Elena made a silent promise to herself, and to Maria. Tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow she would begin to really see the people around her, to listen to their stories, to remember why music had called to her in the first place. It wasn't about perfection or prestige or even talent, really. It was about what happened when fingers touched keys and sounds became feelings, when notes on a page became a voice that could speak across time and circumstance and difference. It was about connection. Over the next 2 weeks, a new routine developed. Elena would finish her last lesson of the day, then meet Maria in practice room 4. Sometimes they would play for each other. Other times they would sit side by side, poring over Maria's compositions, discussing phrasing and harmony as equals. Elena was continually surprised by the depth of Maria's musical knowledge. Despite 10 years away from formal study, she could discuss Bach's counterpoint or Schubert's harmonic innovations with the insight of a true scholar. More than once, Elena found herself rethinking her own interpretations based on Maria's thoughtful suggestions. "You have a remarkable ear," Elena told her one evening as they worked through a particularly challenging passage in one of Maria's chamber pieces. "Have you ever thought of teaching?" Maria laughed softly. "Who would hire me? I have no degree from an American school, no recent performance experience, and my resume says janitor for the past decade." The truth of this statement hung between them, uncomfortable but undeniable. Elena frowned, turning back to the music to hide her growing sense of injustice. "Your background shouldn't matter," she said finally. "Not when you play like you do." Maria shrugged, the gesture somehow containing the weight of countless disappointments and compromises. "The world doesn't always work that way. Besides, I'm grateful for what I have. My daughter is healthy. We have a small apartment, enough food, and now," she gestured to the piano, "I have music again. That's more than many people get." Elena nodded, though the inequality of it all still bothered her. She had begun looking forward to these evening sessions more than her regular teaching day. There was something refreshing about Maria's approach to music. Her joy in it, her lack of pretension, her ability to find beauty in even the simplest pieces. One Friday evening, as they were finishing up, Elena made a sudden decision. "Would you like to come to my house for dinner tomorrow night?" she asked. "You could bring Anna. I have a piano at home, not as nice as these, but decent, and we could play without watching the clock." Maria looked surprised by the invitation. "You want to meet my daughter?" "I do," Elena said, realizing how much she meant it. "You talk about her all the time. I feel like I know her already." Maria hesitated, then smiled. "She would like that, I think. She's curious about where I go in the evenings now." "Good. Is 6 o'clock okay? I'll text you my address." As Elena drove home that night, she felt oddly nervous, like a teenager planning a first date. It had been years since she'd invited anyone to her home. Her social circle had gradually shrunk after her injury, her bitterness pushing away friends until only the most persistent remained. Now even those relationships had cooled to occasional holiday cards and rare phone calls. The next day, Elena spent hours cleaning her small house, dusting the piano that had sat mostly unused for years, and preparing a meal that she hoped would please both Maria and a 13-year-old girl. She settled on enchiladas, following a recipe she found online and hoping it wasn't an offensive choice. At precisely 6 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Elena smoothed her hair, took a deep breath, and opened the door. Maria stood there in a simple blue dress, the first time Elena had seen her out of her gray uniform. Beside her was a tall, serious-looking girl with her mother's dark eyes and straight posture. "Elena, this is my daughter Anna," Maria said. "Anna, this is Ms. Mercer, the piano teacher I told you about." "It's nice to meet you," Anna said politely, though her expression remained cautious. "Mom says you're helping her play again." "Your mother doesn't need much help," Elena replied, stepping back to let them in. "She's teaching me as much as I'm teaching her." Anna's eyebrows rose slightly and she glanced at her mother with new interest. Elena led them into the living room, where sheet music was arranged neatly on the piano and the smell of baking cheese filled the air. "Dinner will be ready in about 20 minutes, Elena said. "Would you like something to drink? I have lemonade, water, or tea." As they settled in with their drinks, the initial awkwardness slowly faded. Anna, it turned out, was not only smart but funny, with a dry wit that occasionally broke through her teenage reserve. She was indeed passionate about science, particularly astronomy, and spoke animatedly about a recent school trip to an observatory. "The universe is so much bigger than we can imagine," she told Elena, her eyes bright with enthusiasm. "There are more stars than grains of sand on all the beaches of Earth. Doesn't that make you feel small?" "In a good way, I hope?" Elena asked. Anna nodded. "It's comforting, actually. My problems seem less huge when I think about how big everything is." During dinner, Elena noticed the easy affection between mother and daughter, the gentle teasing, the inside jokes, the way they automatically adjusted to each other's needs without speaking. Despite their difficult circumstances, they had clearly built a loving home together. After they finished eating, Elena suggested they move to the piano. "Would you play something for Anna?" she asked Maria. "She hasn't heard you perform in a long time, has she?" Anna shook her head. "Not really. Sometimes she plays a little on the keyboard at the library, but it's not the same." "Then you're in for a treat," Elena said, gesturing to the piano. "Your mother is extraordinary." Maria looked embarrassed but pleased as she sat down at the instrument. She flexed her fingers, took a breath, and began to play Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor. It was a challenging piece, technically demanding and emotionally complex, but Maria played it with the confidence of someone who had lived with the music for years. Elena watched Anna's face as her mother played. The girl's expression transformed from polite interest to astonishment as the piece progressed. By the time Maria reached the thunderous coda, with its cascading notes and dramatic intensity, Anna was leaning forward in her seat, completely absorbed. When the final chord faded, there was a moment of perfect silence before Anna spoke. "Mom," she said, her voice hushed with awe, "I didn't know you could play like that." Maria smiled, a hint of sadness in her eyes. "There was a time when I played like this every day. Why did you stop?" Anna asked. "You're amazing." Maria and Elena exchanged a glance, years of shared understanding passing between them, though they had known each other only weeks. "Life got complicated," Maria said simply. "But I'm finding my way back to it now." Later, as they all shared slices of apple pie, Elena brought up an idea that had been forming in her mind for days. "Maria, the spring recital is coming up in a month," she began. "Would you consider performing? Just one piece. There's always a faculty showcase at the beginning before the students play." Maria nearly choked on her pie. "Me perform at the recital? But I'm not faculty." "You could be," Elena said quietly. Both Maria and Anna stared at her. "What do you mean?" Maria asked. Elena set down her fork, choosing her words carefully. "I've been thinking about this for a while. We need a new instructor for beginning students. Enrollment is up, and I've had to turn away several young children because my schedule is full. But the director—" "Richard listens to me," Elena interrupted. "He trusts my judgment about musical matters. If I tell him I've found someone exceptional, he'll at least give you an interview." "An interview where I explain the gap in my resume?" Maria said skeptically. "Where I tell him I've spent the last decade cleaning his academy instead of performing." "You've been maintaining your skills all this time," Elena argued. "And your compositions, Maria, they're really good. Richard needs to hear them. He needs to hear you play." Anna, who had been following this exchange with wide eyes, suddenly spoke up. "Mom, you should do it. You're always telling me to take chances, to believe in myself. Maybe it's your turn." Maria looked from her daughter to Elena, uncertainty written across her face. "Even if Richard agreed, how would it work? I still need to support us. Start with a few hours a week," Elena suggested. "Keep your evening job if you need to. Though I think once Richard hears you play, he'll want to hire you full-time." Maria was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tapping an absent-minded rhythm on the table edge. "And you really think I should play at the recital? In front of all those parents and students?" "Yes," Elena said firmly. "It's time for people to see who you really are." The evening ended with no firm decision, but Elena could see that she had planted a seed. As she hugged them both goodbye at the door, Anna whispered to her, "Thank you for believing in my mom." The words stayed with Elena long after they had gone, echoing in her mind as she washed dishes and straightened the living room. She had accused herself of kindness, but the truth was more complicated. Maria's talent deserved recognition. That was simple justice, not charity. Monday morning, Elena arrived at the academy earlier than usual. She had a 9 a.m. appointment with Richard Dixon, the academy's director, and she wanted time to organize her thoughts. Richard was a practical man in his 60s who had built the academy from a small teaching studio into a respected institution. He knew business better than music, but he was fair-minded and genuinely committed to the academy's success. "Elena," he greeted her warmly as she entered his office. "What can I do for you? You said it was important." Elena took a deep breath. "Richard, I need to talk to you about our staffing needs and about a remarkable pianist I've discovered." Richard leaned back in his chair, intrigued. "I'm listening." "I believe I've found someone who would be perfect to teach our beginning students," Elena began. "She's classically trained with conservatory education. Her technique is impeccable, and she has a natural gift for connecting with others." "Sounds promising," Richard said. "Where is she teaching now?" This was the tricky part. Elena met his gaze directly. "She's not teaching currently. In fact, you already know her, though not as a pianist. She works here as part of the evening cleaning staff." Richard's eyebrows shot up. "The cleaning staff? You're joking." "I am completely serious," Elena replied. "Her name is Maria Suarez. She studied at the National Conservatory in Bogotá before coming to the United States. Due to personal circumstances, she had to put her music career aside, but her talent is extraordinary." Richard frowned, tapping his pen against his desk. "Elena, I trust your musical judgment, but this is unusual to say the least. How did you even discover that she plays?" Elena told him the story. Her initial dismissive encounter with Maria, the night she heard Chopin floating through the hallways, the revelation of Maria's background and talent. As she spoke, she could see Richard's expression shifting from skepticism to curiosity. "I'd like you to hear her play," Elena concluded. "If you're not impressed, I won't mention it again. But if you are, and I believe you will be, I hope you'll consider creating a position for her, even if it's just a few hours a week to start." Richard was quiet for a moment, considering. "The optics would be good," he admitted finally. "A story about recognizing talent wherever it's found. Could help with those diversity grant applications we've been working on." Elena bit back a sharp response. Richard was being practical as always, and if that practicality helped Maria, did the motivation matter? So you'll hear her play? She pressed. Richard nodded. Set it up. But Elena, he gave her a serious look. She needs to be as good as you say. I can't create a teaching position based on a nice story. She's better than I say, Elena replied with confidence. You'll see. The week that followed was one of the most stressful Elena could remember. She had arranged for Richard to hear Maria play the following Monday evening, which gave Maria just 7 days to prepare. Though Elena had complete confidence in Maria's abilities, she understood the pressure her friend was under. This wasn't just a casual performance, it was potentially life-changing. What should I play? Maria asked during their evening practice session. Her normally steady hands trembled slightly as she sorted through sheet music. Something classical to show technique? One of my own compositions? I don't know what would impress him most. Play what moves you, Elena advised. Richard knows music, even if he's more businessman than artist these days. He'll recognize sincerity when he hears it. Maria nodded, though she didn't look entirely convinced. It's been so long since I played for anyone important. What if I freeze up? What if all those years of not practicing regularly have damaged my abilities more than I realize? Elena placed a hand over Maria's. I've heard you play nearly every day for weeks now. Trust me when I say this. Your music has something special, something that can't be taught or practiced. It comes from who you are and what you've lived through. For the next several days, Maria used every spare moment to practice. Elena gave her a key to the academy, allowing her to come in early before her cleaning shift began. Often, Elena would arrive in the morning to find Maria already there, working through passages with the focused determination of a professional preparing for a concert. By unspoken agreement, they chose 3 pieces for the audition. Chopin's Ballad No. 1, which showcased Maria's technical prowess and emotional depth. A Bach Prelude and Fugue, to demonstrate her understanding of classical form and counterpoint. And one of her own compositions, Memories of Home, which revealed her unique voice as a creator. The weekend before the audition, Elena invited Maria and Anna over again, this time for a mock performance. She wanted Maria to have a chance to play the full program with an audience before facing Richard. Pretend we're not here, Elena instructed as Maria sat down at the piano. Play as if you're alone with the music. Maria closed her eyes, took several deep breaths, and began. From the first notes, Elena could tell that something had shifted in Maria's playing. There was a new confidence, a sense of purpose that hadn't been there before. She played not like someone hoping for approval, but like an artist with something important to say. When she finished the program, both Elena and Anna burst into applause. Anna rushed to hug her mother, her face glowing with pride. You're going to get this job, she said with teenage certainty. No way they don't hire you after hearing that. Maria smiled, though anxiety still shadowed her eyes. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. This is just the first step, but an important one, Elena added. And you're ready for it. Monday arrived with a spring rainstorm that drenched the city. Elena paced in her office, checking the clock every few minutes. Richard had agreed to come at 6:30, after his administrative duties were finished but before Maria's regular cleaning shift would begin. At 6, Maria arrived soaking wet despite her umbrella. The bus was late, she explained breathlessly. Then I had to run from the stop. There's still time, Elena assured her, helping her out of her wet coat. Use practice room 4 to warm up. I've already put the grand piano there to make it look more like a proper audition space. While Maria prepared, Elena met Richard in the hallway, relieved to see that he had actually remembered their appointment. I can only stay for 20 minutes, he warned her. I have a dinner meeting with potential donors at 7. That's all we need, Elena replied, leading him toward the practice room. I appreciate you making the time. Before they entered, Elena paused with her hand on the doorknob. Richard, I just want to say, please listen with an open mind. Forget what you know about her current position here. Richard gave her a long look. I always try to be fair, Elena, you know that. Inside, Maria stood as they entered, smoothing down her simple black dress, borrowed from Elena and slightly too large, but the best they could manage on short notice. Miss Suarez, Richard said, extending his hand. Elena has told me quite a lot about you. Thank you for this opportunity, Mr. Dixon, Maria replied, her voice remarkably steady despite the slight tremor in her handshake. I understand you studied at the conservatory in Bogota? Richard asked, taking a seat in the chair Elena had placed for him. Yes, for 4 years. I was working toward my performance degree when personal circumstances brought me to the United States. Richard nodded, glancing at his watch. Well, I'm curious to hear you play. Whenever you're ready. Maria took her place at the piano, adjusting the bench with the careful precision of a trained performer. She looked at Elena, who gave her an encouraging nod, then turned her attention to the keys. The Bach came first, the prelude and fugue in D minor from the well-tempered clavier, Book I. Maria played with crystalline clarity, bringing out the mathematical precision of Bach's counterpoint, while maintaining a singing tone that made the music feel alive and breathing. Elena watched Richard's face as he listened. His expression remained neutral, though she noticed him leaning forward slightly, his eyes fixed on Maria's hands. Without pausing for reaction, Maria moved directly into the Chopin Ballade. Here she allowed her emotional connection to the music to shine through, building from the reflective opening to the passionate, stormy conclusion with masterful pacing. Elena had heard her play this piece several times now, but never with such conviction. There was an urgency to her interpretation tonight, as if she were telling her own story through Chopin's notes. When the final chord of the ballade faded, Richard shifted in his seat and glanced at his watch again. Elena felt a pang of worry. Was he unmoved by what he had just heard? I have one more piece, Maria said, looking directly at Richard. Something I composed myself if you'd like to hear it. Please, Richard said, his expression still unreadable. Maria straightened her shoulders and began to play Memories of Home. The piece started simply, with a melody that echoed Colombian folk songs from her childhood, then gradually incorporated more complex harmonies and rhythms. There was something profoundly honest about the music. It spoke of loss and longing, but also of resilience and hope. As the final notes hung in the air, Elena held her breath. Richard was silent for several long seconds. That last piece, he finally said. You composed that? Maria nodded. Yes, it's called Memories of Home. Have you written others? Many. I've been composing since I was a teenager. Richard stood, straightening his tie. Well, Ms. Suarez, you're clearly a talented pianist. Helena wasn't exaggerating about that. He paused, glancing at his watch once more. I need to leave for my dinner meeting, but I'd like you to come to my office tomorrow morning at 10. We can discuss possibilities then. After Richard left, Maria turned to Elena with wide eyes. What does that mean? Did he like it? Is he considering me for teaching? It means you impressed him, Elena said, grinning widely. Richard doesn't waste time on people who don't interest him. If he wants to meet again, it's a very good sign. That night, neither woman got much sleep. Maria called Elena twice with new worries. What if Richard only wanted to let her down gently in person? What if he offered her a position but the pay was too low to live on? What if the other faculty objected to a janitor becoming a teacher? Stop borrowing trouble, Elena told her firmly. One step at a time. Let's see what he offers before we worry about all the what-ifs. The next morning, Elena waited anxiously outside Richard's office while Maria met with him. The meeting lasted nearly an hour, far longer than Elena had expected. When Maria finally emerged, her expression was unreadable. Well, Elena demanded, unable to contain herself. What happened? Maria closed the office door behind her before speaking. He offered me a job, she said, her voice hushed with disbelief. Starting with beginning students 6 hours a week, but with potential to increase as enrollment grows. Elena let out a whoop of joy that echoed down the hallway, causing several nearby students to turn and stare. I knew it. What did I tell you? When do you start? Next month after the spring recital. Maria's smile grew wider. And he wants me to perform in the faculty showcase. Not just one piece, he wants me to play for 10 minutes. Including your composition? Maria nodded. He especially wanted that. He said it would be good for students to see that music is a living art, not just something created by dead Europeans. They hugged tightly, both blinking back tears. There's more, Maria said as they pulled apart. Richard wants to start a scholarship program for talented students who can't afford full tuition. He asked if I would help design it since I understand those barriers. Elena felt a surge of pride, both in Maria for impressing Richard so thoroughly, and in Richard himself for recognizing what was being offered to the academy. It wasn't just a new piano teacher. It was a whole new perspective, a way to reach students they might never have connected with otherwise. The month leading up to the spring recital passed in a blur of preparation. Maria continued her cleaning job in the evenings while preparing for her performance and her new teaching role. Elena helped her select appropriate materials for beginning students and shared her own teaching methods. Word had begun to spread through the academy about the janitor who was joining the faculty. Elena overheard students whispering in the hallways, their curiosity piqued by this unusual development. Some of the other teachers were skeptical, though most reserved judgment until they could hear Maria play. The night of the recital arrived with all the usual chaos and excitement. Parents filled the rows of seats in the main hall, programs in hand. Students waited nervously backstage, running through pieces in their heads or whispering last-minute reminders to each other. In a small practice room away from the crowd, Maria sat with Elena and Anna trying to stay calm. "Everyone's going to love you," Anna assured her mother, straightening the collar of the simple black dress they had bought for the occasion, Maria's first new dress in years. "Just remember to breathe," Elena added. "The music knows what to do. Trust it." When it was time, they walked together to the wings of the stage. The faculty showcase was about to begin, with Maria scheduled to perform last. The position of honor. Elena performed first, playing a Schubert impromptu with the polished confidence of an experienced teacher. As she took her bow, she caught Maria's eye off stage and gave her an encouraging smile. 3 other faculty members performed, each demonstrating the high level of musicianship that had built the academy's reputation. And then it was Maria's turn. "Our final faculty performer tonight is new to our teaching staff but not to music," Richard announced from the stage. "Maria Suarez joins us with a wealth of experience and talent. We are delighted to welcome her to our academy family." As Maria walked onto the stage, Elena held her breath. The audience applauded politely, not yet understanding the significance of this moment. Maria took her seat at the piano, adjusted the bench, and placed her hands on the keys. From the first note, Elena knew this performance would be different from all their practice sessions. There was a freedom in Maria's playing now, a sense of finally stepping into her true self after years of hiding. She played the Chopin with breathtaking emotion, then moved into her own composition with the confidence of a composer who knows the value of her voice. The audience sat in rapt attention. Even the youngest children, usually fidgeting by this point in the program, were still caught by the story Maria's music was telling, a story of obstacles overcome, of beauty persisting against all odds, of finding one's way back to a dream long deferred. When she finished, there was a moment of silence, that precious space between the end of truly moving music and the world's response to it. Then the audience erupted in applause. Parents stood, students cheered, and Elena found herself wiping away tears. Later that night, after the student performances had concluded and the reception was winding down, Elena found Maria standing quietly by the refreshment table, watching as Anna chatted animatedly with some of the academy students. "How does it feel?" Elena asked, handing her a cup of punch. Maria considered the question carefully before answering. "Like coming home," she said finally. "Like finding a piece of myself I thought was lost forever." Elena nodded, understanding completely. "You're playing tonight. I've never heard anything more honest." "I kept thinking about that day you found me touching the piano keys," Maria said with a small smile. "When you told me to stick to cleaning." Elena winced at the memory. "Not my finest moment." "No," Maria agreed, "but maybe a necessary one. It was the beginning of all this." She gestured around the room, at the parents congratulating their children, the students comparing notes on performances, the community brought together by music. "I've been thinking," Elena said after a moment. "Your composition today, it deserves to be published. There should be more. Have you considered applying to graduate programs in composition? With your talent?" Maria laughed, holding up her hand to stop Elena's flow of ideas. "One step at a time, my friend. Let me learn to be a teacher first. The rest will come when it's ready." As they stood together watching the room, Elena felt a deep sense of rightness, as if the world had shifted slightly and settled into a better alignment. She had always believed that music revealed truth, about the composer, about the performer, about the human heart. What she had forgotten until Maria reminded her was that music could also create truth, new possibilities, new connections, new ways of seeing the people around us. "Thank you," she said simply, "for playing that first night, for letting me hear you." Maria smiled, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "And thank you for listening. Really listening." Around them, the next generation of musicians gathered their instruments and sheet music, ready to continue their journeys. And two women who had once been strangers, separated by circumstance, assumption, and Missy,